The message came late in the evening from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. They asked if I was really offering what they'd seen on my profile. The wording didn't make sense, but the link they included pulled me straight into something I couldn't unsee. There it was, my name, my photos, arranged in a way that felt calculated. The captions dripped with false intimacy, selling promises I had never made, framing me as someone I wasn't. Even the choice of words was deliberate, polished, and predatory. The realization landed hard. These weren't stolen from public posts. They were private moments shared years ago in trust with someone I once believed wouldn't weaponize them. The pattern of captions, the pacing of posts, all of it whispered her fingerprints. I didn't answer the person who sent the message. Instead, I stayed at my desk, letting the screen burn into my mind. This wasn't just theft. It was personal. And while she thought she was in control of the game, she had no idea how quickly the board was about to change. My name is Daniel Hart. I'm 38 and make my living as a freelance marketing consultant. Most days start the same. A coffee at my desk, emails sorted before 9, client calls filling the late morning, and afternoons spent buried in campaign strategies or copy reviews. It's a rhythm I've come to rely on, predictable in a way that keeps both my clients and my own headspace steady. I met Emily 5 years ago at a dinner hosted by mutual friends. She had that rare ability to make a room feel lighter, and people tended to orbit around her. For a while, I was one of them. Spent nearly 3 years together. It wasn't without its disagreements, but there was enough mutual respect, or so I thought, to believe that when we parted, it would be clean. The breakup felt mutual at the time. She moved into a new apartment, started seeing someone else not long after, and I went back to work with more focus than before. My days became simple again, the kind of life where the only surprises came from a client changing a deadline. That's why the fake profile cut so deep. It wasn't just the theft of images. It was a deliberate breach by someone who had been given access to the most personal parts of my life. Someone I believed would never cross that line. Shock has a half-life. It fades, and what's left is focus. Scrolling through the profile, a pattern appeared that didn't belong to accident. Every image carried a context only 2 people knew: angles from my apartment, the edge of a book we joked about, the hoodie she used to borrow. None of them were public. All of them came from messages that should have stayed private. The captions did the heavy lifting. Lines that blended flattery with scarcity. Last chance. One night only. DM for access. Prices weren't listed outright, but the callouts were unmistakable. Tip to unlock premium chat. Exclusive live. It wasn't just impersonation. It was a funnel. The phrasing leaned on suggestion over promise. The same rhythm Emily used to write cheeky birthday notes. 3 dots, then a winking emoji. Even her habit of doubling exclamation points showed up like a signature she thought no one would recognize. Some photos had been cropped to remove details that would date them. No holiday decorations, no recognizable background, just enough face to be persuasive and enough ambiguity to be profitable. A few were edited to soften skin and shift color temperature warmer, the sort of tweaks she used to make on her own posts when we were together. If you know someone's voice, you can hear it in their edits. Anger didn't arrive loud. It arrived measured, like realizing a lock was picked cleanly, not smashed. Strangers were being led to believe I was selling access to myself. Clients who Googled me could have landed on that page and decided they didn't need the headache. Family could have seen it and made polite, permanent distance. Reputation takes years to build and a handful of screenshots to bend out of shape. Friend stepped in where my knowledge ended. Maya works in cybersecurity, the kind of person who speaks in logs and timestamps. She didn't hack anything. She just used publicly available metadata and platform tools that most people don't know exist. The account had been active for at least a month, she said. First post on the 6th. Steady cadence every 3 to 4 days. Peak activity around 9 p.m. my time. IP hints pointed to a neighborhood that wasn't mine. The payment links routed through third-party processors to an alias that mirrored one of Emily's old gamertags. None of it was courtroom evidence by itself. Together, it tightened the circle. The DMIs, even limited by privacy settings, revealed a tone I recognized. Openers like, "Hey you," and "Promise I'll make it worth your while" weren't generic. They were recycled. She'd used that exact heart hands emoji when she wanted to smooth over an argument. Here, it was bait. The more I read, the more it felt like watching someone pawn off memories for incremental cash. Every new piece could have justified a confrontation. But what would that buy? An argument shifts the center of gravity to whoever's loudest, and she's always been comfortable selling a narrative. If she knew I'd found the profile, she'd pivot lock it down, move platforms, spin a story about a hater X. Noise favors the impulsive. Quiet favors the prepared. So the work turned inward, cataloging images against original timestamps, noting file names she wouldn't have changed, capturing URLs and post IDs, preserving sequences so nothing could be accused of being out of context. Each entry got a line. Image gives original message. Date gives unauthorized post date, gives monetization. Callout. The column labeled risk wasn't about me alone. It included client confusion, impersonation liability, and potential extortion attempts. When you turn humiliation into a checklist, you take back some ground. The choice clarified itself. She wanted attention. I wanted resolution. Platforms don't respond to drama. They respond to documented violations tied to policy. A direct confrontation would give her oxygen. A formal report would remove the air entirely. The plan became simple. End it where it lived, without warning, without a scene. There's a particular calm that comes with deciding you don't need an apology to move forward. What mattered wasn't making her admit anything. It was closing the door she'd pried open and locking it in a way she couldn't undo. The account was a storefront built out of stolen trust. I wasn't going to argue with the shopkeeper. I was going to shut off the lights. There was no dramatic unfollow, no blocking spree, no accusatory message sent at midnight. The account stayed untouched from my end because touching it would have signaled I was watching. And right now, invisibility was leverage. The documentation became its own quiet routine. Every morning, I'd check the profile, capture fresh screenshots, and log them with dates and post times. Threads of interactions from strangers were saved, their usernames copied into a spreadsheet. Some were casual comments, others more explicit. But each was proof that the profile wasn't just sitting there. It was active, earning, spreading. The more she posted, the stronger my archive became. Maya, with her steady technical patience, pushed me to skip the standard report user form altogether. That's for random spam, she said. You want this in front of their trust and safety team. She walked me through exactly how to reach them, the language that would bypass the generic ticket system, and which file formats would preserve metadata without corruption. It stopped being just evidence. It was a casefile.s. The report took shape. I matched every post to its original source. Private messages, shared albums, or my own archived folders. Each one was labeled with the original date, confirming it predated the fake account by years. Alongside them, I listed the relevant platform rules: impersonation, monetized use of non-consensual content, and identity misrepresentation. The violations were so clear they barely needed commentary. Meanwhile, she kept posting like the storefront was hers to run forever. New captions, new bait, the same stolen foundation. She didn't know that every word she typed was being preserved in a file that could erase her entire operation in a single email. That was the quiet satisfaction, watching her believe the window was wide open while I was already reaching for the latch. The silence didn't feel passive anymore. It felt deliberate. Every step I took in the background widened the gap between what she thought I could do and what I was actually preparing to do. The days stopped blending into one another once the investigation took on structure. Each morning began with a checklist, and each evening ended with a few more threads tied down. This wasn't a vague sense of, she probably did it anymore. This was becoming a mapped, undeniable trail. Reverse image searches were the first step. The results weren't surprising, but they were unsettling. The same photos from her fake profile had popped up on smaller discussion boards and niche forums. Sometimes reposted with slight cropping, sometimes with filters to blur backgrounds. On one page, someone had asked where the images came from, and the answer was a handle I immediately recognized. It wasn't her current account, but an old username she'd used years ago, the one tied to a personal blog she'd abandoned. The choice to reuse it now wasn't just sloppy, it was arrogant. The payment links were another fracture in her secrecy. They looked like standard checkout forms, but a closer inspection showed the account holder's name wasn't entirely hidden, just shortened, with one letter missing from her surname. It was the kind of mistake you make when you're too confident no one will look closely. I took screenshots of the payment pages, copied the URLs, and saved transaction records wherever they were public-facing. This wasn't just evidence of impersonation anymore. It was proof of profit from stolen identity. Maya's contribution turned the whole picture sharper. Using tools I couldn't begin to operate, she traced the IP addresses associated with the public posts. 3 separate times, they resolved back to the same small range, all registered within her neighborhood's network area. The likelihood of that happening by coincidence was effectively zero. With each confirmation, the case shifted from assumption to certainty. Old conversations added a layer of irony I hadn't expected. Months before we'd broken up, she'd once joked in a text that people will pay for anything online if you make it sound exclusive. At the time, I'd laughed it off as harmless cynicism. Reading it now, it read like a thesis statement for her entire scheme. That message went into the file, along with the date and the thread it came from. The more I found, the more my anger cooled into something steadier. Focus. Emotion was useful for staying motivated, but not for building. A case that could stand without me in the room. I wasn't chasing her anymore. I was following a breadcrumb trail she'd left so carelessly, as if convinced no one would ever bother to follow it. By the end of the week, my folder had transformed into something close to a prosecution binder. Every screenshot was labeled. Every payment link had a note on its destination. The IP data was charted, the usernames cross-referenced, the old text messages archived. There wasn't a single claim in the report that didn't have a visual or digital record attached to it. When I finally sent it to the platform's trust and safety team, I didn't embellish a word. No emotional pleas, no dramatic accusations, just the facts laid out in a sequence they couldn't ignore. This wasn't a complaint anymore. It was a closing argument. And if they did their job the way their own policy promised, that profiles' days were numbered. The strange part was realizing that in the process of collecting it all, the power balance had already shifted. She still thought she was in control of the narrative, still believed she was untouchable behind a screen. But I'd moved past the point of needing her to admit anything. Whether she ever knew I'd been watching didn't matter. The outcome would tell her everything she needed to know. The moment the report left my hands, I knew I couldn't treat it as the finish line. Platforms take time to process cases like this, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, and wasn't about to leave the rest of my digital life vulnerable while waiting for their decision. If she'd gone this far once, there was no reason to believe she wouldn't try again somewhere else. Every account tied to my name became a priority. Email, banking, professional networks. Even old profiles I hadn't logged into in years. All of them got new passwords, generated randomly, and stored in an encrypted manager. Two-factor authentication went from something I should set up to an immediate, non-negotiable step. By the time I was done, logging into my own accounts felt like passing through a series of locked gates. That was the point social platforms were next. I combed through privacy settings line by line, removing public visibility from anything she could use to piece together new content. Photos, posts, and contact lists were stripped back to their bare essentials. Anything that didn't serve a clear purpose came down. It wasn't about hiding from the world. It was about removing the low-hanging fruit she'd been able to pluck so easily before. My client base was another consideration. These were people who trusted me, not just with their projects, but with their brand reputations. I reached out individually, not in a mass email, but in direct, professional messages, explaining that there was a chance someone might attempt to impersonate me online. The tone was measured, fact-focused. I didn't need them to panic. I needed them to be alert. KV responded with immediate support, offering to pass along any suspicious links or messages. The rest simply acknowledged it and moved on, which was fine by me. The work wasn't fueled by paranoia. If anything, it felt methodical, almost clinical. Prevention has a different energy than damage control. It's calmer, more deliberate. I wasn't scrambling to patch leaks. I was sealing doors before the water could rise. There was also a certain quiet satisfaction in knowing that, for the first time since discovering the fake profile, she no longer had an easy way back in. If she went looking for another opening, she'd find locks where there had once been open windows. If she tried to test those locks, I'd know immediately by the time I finished. The anxiety that had been humming in the background all week had dropped to a low, manageable hum. Whatever happened with the platform's review, my foundation was solid. I didn't need to be reactive anymore. I was ahead of her, and that shift, subtle as it was, mattered more than I'd expected. The situation had started with me staring at a profile I couldn't control. Now, the balance had flipped. She could keep guessing at my next move. I'd already made it. The email landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a client update and a newsletter I never read. The subject line was plain enough, case resolution notification, but as soon as I saw the sender, my attention narrowed. I opened it and read slowly, letting each sentence register. The platform confirmed that the account had been permanently removed for multiple violations, including impersonation, unauthorized use of intellectual property, and fraudulent activity. They thanked me for my detailed cooperation and noted that my evidence had been instrumental in their decision. No appeals would be granted. That line mattered more than I expected. It meant the door wasn't just closed, it was locked. From their side, too. There was no rush of triumph, no dramatic swell of relief, just a steady, grounded certainty that the situation was no longer hanging over my head. I read the email twice, then archived it. The proof was there if I needed it, but I didn't plan on looking at it again. Some things are better stored quietly. Like insurance, you hope you never have to use. A few hours later, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. The text was short. Do you have any idea what happened to my side project? There was no greeting, no context, as if she expected me to instantly step into the role of confidant again. The choice of words stood out. Side project, not scam. Adapt impersonation, not the theft it really was. Just something harmless sounding. As if the language could soften the reality of what she'd done. I didn't bother crafting a layered response. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a chance for her to reframe what had happened. I typed a single sentence. The platform said it violated their terms. No accusation, no moral lecture. Just the truth, stripped of any emotion she could twist into an argument. Her reply never came. Minutes turned into hours, and the silence stretched on until it became its own statement. For someone who had built an entire operation around using my image without permission, she suddenly had nothing to say when faced with consequences she couldn't spin. That silence carried weight. It wasn't just the absence of words, it was the absence of control. For weeks, she had been the one directing the narrative, deciding which images to post, how to caption them, and how to profit from them. The platform had erased that power, and I hadn't needed to raise my voice once. I realized in that moment that I didn't need an apology. The takedown was the acknowledgement. Oh, the removal was the accountability. Whether she admitted fault out loud didn't change the fact that her actions had been publicly labeled for what they were, a violation. The temptation to feel vindicated was there, but it was tempered by something steadier, the understanding that this was how real resolution works. Not with dramatic scenes or confrontations in public, but with quiet, decisive actions that leave no room for reversal. That email from the platform was more than just a case closure. It was the final proof that taking the long route, the patient, documented, methodical route, had been worth it. And while she might have seen this as the end of a side project, for me, it was the end of a chapter I hadn't chosen to start, but had chosen exactly how to end. The weeks turned into months, and her absence became almost routine. No new profiles appeared, no whispers from clients about strange messages or suspicious requests. The digital noise she had stirred up was gone, leaving behind a kind of stillness I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I kept the evidence neatly stored, not because I expected to use it, but because preparedness was now second nature. Set in a secure folder, labeled and timestamped, a quiet reminder that I'd chosen to protect myself rather than react in anger. And though I never checked it, just knowing it was there was enough. Work carried on as it always had. My clients stayed informed, my projects stayed on track, and life slipped back into its steady rhythm. The difference was subtle, but significant. I no longer felt the need to glance over my shoulder online, wondering if my name was being attached to something I'd never agreed to. Every so often, I would think about what her silence really meant. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't regret. It was recognition, even if only to herself, that the game was over. She had tested how far she could push, and she had learned the limit. Not because I shouted or threatened, but because I built a wall she couldn't climb without exposing herself further. That, I think, is what made the resolution so complete. There was no public scene, no last argument to drag the matter into messy territory. It's just a closed door and the knowledge that she wouldn't knock again. Quiet outcomes can feel unsatisfying to anyone looking for drama, but in reality, they're often the cleanest victories. Looking back, I realized the real lesson wasn't about betrayal. It was about control, not over other people's actions, but over how I chose to respond. She had tried to rewrite my identity for her own gain, but I had the final say in what my name and image would stand for. That was something no one could take unless I allowed it. If you've ever had someone use your name, your work, or your image without permission, you know the instinct to react fast and loud is strong. But sometimes the most lasting resolution comes from staying calm, being methodical, and letting the truth work in your favor. In the end, the calmest response really can be the most final one.